November 1944, Leyte Gulf, Philippines. The hands of Lieutenant Takeshi Yamada tightened on his katana as he watched the horizon turn orange with American artillery fire. On this rain-soaked battlefield, the 41st Infantry Division would become the first American unit to face a full regimental Banzai charge using the new fire direction centers, marking a historic moment that would forever change Japanese assumptions about infantry superiority. Coordinated fire raining down with devastating precision, unlike anything we have seen before. He would later report to his battalion commander at Mindanao words that revealed the first cracks in centuries of Japanese infantry doctrine. Through sheets of tropical rain, he had witnessed something that contradicted everything the Imperial Japanese Army had taught. American artillery batteries, those distant weapons that Japanese intelligence had dismissed as slow and cumbersome, had orchestrated a wall of steel that no human wave could penetrate. In Manchuria, in Burma, over Singapore, the Banzai charge had terrified enemies into retreat. No Allied defense could withstand its ferocity and psychological shock. Yet here, on this blood-soaked island, American gunners in their muddy fire bases were dictating the terms of battle from distances the Japanese sword could never reach. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The artillery battalions from the 41st Infantry Division claimed over 300 Japanese casualties during this first coordinated defense, executing barrages that rendered the Banzai charge's legendary ferocity useless. The mathematics of combat superiority were being rewritten not in infantry manuals, but in the stark reality of fire direction centers that would soon demolish every assumption Japanese commanders carried about their invincibility, their tactics, and their enemy. The collapse of Japanese offensive superiority had begun long before that November night, though no one in the Imperial Japanese Army would have believed it. Since December 7, 1941, Japanese infantry had swept across the Pacific with an aura of unstoppable momentum. The Banzai charge, with its overwhelming shock effect and spiritual power, had earned a fearsome reputation. The sight of hundreds of screaming soldiers rushing forward with fixed bayonets and ceremonial swords seemed impossible to stop, and its ability to break enemy morale made it deadly in traditional defensive situations. Among the elite officers was Major Hiroshi Nakamura, veteran of multiple victories, survivor of countless battles. By 1943, Nakamura had achieved stunning victories in the Malayan campaign alone, before being transferred to New Guinea, where he would lead the majority of his eventual 11 successful Banzai charges. His confidence, like that of his fellow officers, was absolute. Colonel Tetsuo Matsuda, Nakamura's immediate superior, had addressed his officers before combat operations on Leyte. The American defenders in this area are known to be regular Army infantry, not Marines. They will break when charged. Their artillery support is primitive compared to our spiritual strength. Prepare your men for a glorious victory. The Japanese officers expected to face disorganized artillery fire, scattered shells landing randomly as American gunners panicked at the sight of charging infantry. The early months of 1942 seemed to conform.
Japanese superiority. Japanese charges had overwhelmed British defenders at Singapore, decimated Dutch positions in Java, and swept aside Australian defenses in New Guinea. The Banzai attack had nearly complete initial dominance in the Pacific theater. Even when facing stronger Allied defensive positions, Japanese commanders maintained their psychological edge through superior commitment and tactics refined over years of fighting in China. But intelligence reports filtering back to Japanese headquarters in mid-1943 spoke of a new American defensive system, something different. Centralized fire control, coordinated battery firing, rapid adjustments. The reports were dismissed by most battalion commanders. How could distant guns possibly threaten the spirit of Japanese infantry? Imperial Army doctrine built on the concept of decisive battle and individual combat skill had no framework for understanding what was coming. The artillery revolution emerges. The American Fire Direction Center was the result of the U.S. Army's response to the lessons learned in the First World War and the innovations of officers like Lieutenant Colonel Carlos Brewer at Fort Sill. Artillery experts had created something unprecedented, a system that could coordinate multiple batteries to deliver precisely timed fires exactly where they were needed. The FDC system, with its detailed fire planning capability, specialized communications networks, and mathematical precision, gave it performance characteristics that seemed impossible to Japanese tacticians. While the Banzai charge had been designed for maximum psychological impact with minimum preparation, the American artillery system represented a different philosophy entirely: science, coordination, firepower, and survivability. The first modern fire direction centers arrived in the Pacific Theater not with fanfare, but with skepticism from infantry commanders. When the first FDCs were established in Australia, they were discovered to have communications problems, and their combat debut was delayed. But by late 1943, these issues were being resolved, and experienced artillery officers from European assignments were rotating to the Pacific with the new system. The 41st Infantry Division was equipped with the standard 105 and 155 mm howitzers, but would soon transition to the complete FDC system. Artillery officers brought with them hard-won experience against German counterattacks. They had learned, often through fatal trial and error, that uncoordinated defensive fire was ineffective against determined mass attacks. The FDC system would give them the tool to fight on their own terms. First blood at Leyte Gulf. November 24, 1944, marked the artillery system's first major engagement with Japanese Banzai charges, when batteries of the 41st Division's Artillery Regiment, firing from hastily prepared positions near Leyte Gulf, engaged a regimental-sized Japanese attack while supporting the infantry defensive line. The results stunned both sides. Japanese officers leading their men forward first heard the strange whistling overhead. Their initial reaction was confusion. Was this the normal, random artillery they had faced before? The pattern and precision suggested something entirely different. By the time they recognized the danger, the first coordinated barrage had already torn gaps in their formation. Artillery batteries would fire continuously in shifting patterns that seemed to anticipate Japanese movements. The extraordinary precision at which the American shells landed allowed them to maneuver their fires into the most devastating patterns.
Japanese commanders could no longer count on the element of surprise or psychological shock for their attacks. The Saipan mission, ultimate demonstration. Nothing demonstrated American artillery superiority more dramatically than the defense of Nafutan Point on June 23, 1944, when 3 artillery battalions coordinated through a single fire direction center stopped a 4,300-man Japanese attack. The defense required precise firing data, extreme coordination, and the ability to shift fires across multiple attack axes successfully. Lieutenant Colonel James Davidson led the defense with artillery batteries in mutually supporting positions and coordinated through a single command post. The psychological impact on Japanese ground forces was devastating. Their largest coordinated attack with full regimental support had been shattered before it could close with American positions. Major Ichiro Tanaka, who had been part of the Saipan attack force, witnessed the defense. His testimony revealed the shock of the Japanese officers at the American artillery's capabilities. The FDC-controlled batteries had created precise killing zones, executed their defensive fires with deadly accuracy, and shifted their impact points before the Japanese formations could adapt. The American gunners had calculated the defensive fires to the meter, timing volleys exactly when Japanese formations were most vulnerable. This level of operational coordination, combined with the artillery's sustained volume of fire, represented capabilities Japan simply couldn't match. Tactical evolution and adaptation. As 1944 progressed, American artillery officers refined their techniques to maximize their advantages. The time-on-target technique,
Bringing multiple batteries to bear with shells landing simultaneously became standard procedure. Japanese officers found themselves helpless against these tactics. The first coordinated defense between the artillery's FDC and infantry defensive positions resulted in 700 Japanese casualties against minimal American losses. These lopsided victories became increasingly common as American units gained experience with their new system. The Japanese attempted various countermeasures. They tried night attacks to avoid observation. They attempted to infiltrate small units between battery positions. They even developed new approach formations to minimize artillery effects. Nothing worked consistently. The coordination gap was simply too large. Industrial reality behind the performance. The FDC's superiority reflected a deeper truth about American industrial capability that Japanese officers were only beginning to grasp. By war end, over 380 artillery battalions would be deployed with complete fire direction centers, with continuous improvement based on field experience. Each new FDC variant addressed weaknesses and enhanced strengths based on combat experience. The 1944 model, arriving in the Philippines campaign, incorporated improved communications, standardized calculation tables for faster response, and better coordination between multiple battalions for even more devastating effect. Japanese artillery development, meanwhile, struggled to produce even basic improvements to their fire control systems. Lieutenant General Masaharu Homa, the conqueror of the Philippines, privately admitted to colleagues in mid-1944, "We are not just facing superior artillery. We are facing a system of continuous improvement we cannot match. Each new American technique we encounter is better than the last."
The training experience divergence. The technological gap was amplified by diverging officer quality. By mid-1944, Japan was losing its experienced officers faster than they could be replaced. Training programs were shortened from 18 months to less than 4 months. New officers arrived at combat units with minimal practical experience in coordinating attacks or countering enemy defenses. American officers, conversely, were arriving with extensive training. They had practiced defensive tactics in advanced training units, studied after-action reports from actual combats, and trained on multiple weapon systems. When they encountered Banzai charges, they applied systematic defenses with practiced coordination between infantry and supporting artillery. Mechanical precision and reliability. The American artillery communication system provided another advantage Japanese officers hadn't fully appreciated: responsiveness. With hardwired field telephones connecting observation posts, command centers, and gun positions, American artillery could respond to attack within minutes. The psychological impact of this reliability was profound. Japanese officers planning attacks over difficult terrain faced failure if their coordinated timing faltered. The Banzai charge's extreme reliance on psychological shock and momentum came at the cost of vulnerability to prepared defenses. A single well-coordinated artillery barrage at the critical moment meant a fiery death for attacking formations. The Intelligence War. By late 1944, Japanese intelligence warned commanders to avoid frontal attacks against American positions, noting the terrifying precision of their defensive fires, rapid shifts in concentration, and ability to coordinate across multiple batteries. These intelligence reports circulated among Japanese headquarters revealed a growing understanding of their disadvantage. One captured Japanese document from December 1944 stated, "The American artillery system must be considered the most dangerous defensive weapon in the Pacific. Its coordination and precision exceed anything we can achieve. Direct assault should be avoided unless possessing overwhelming numerical superiority and the ability to infiltrate between positions."
This admission that Japanese commanders should avoid direct attacks represented a complete reversal of the warrior ethic that had defined Japanese infantry doctrine. The psychological impact was devastating. Officers who had been trained to lead attacks at every opportunity were now being told to avoid the enemy's strengths. The artillery tells the tale. The emergence of specialized American artillery tactics provided stark evidence of the system's superiority. The 11th Field Artillery Battalion achieved a record time-on-target mission, with all rounds hitting within 3 seconds of each other from multiple batteries. The 226th Field Artillery Battalion coordinated a defense that stopped 3,000 attacking Japanese with 72% casualties in less than 20 minutes. These achievements, measured in saved American lives and destroyed enemy formations, exceeded what most Japanese commanders had thought possible from artillery. Over 60,000 Japanese soldiers would fall to coordinated American artillery in the Pacific Theater. This tally represented not just casualties, but experienced officers and veterans lost.
Officers Japan could never replace. Each defeat diminished Japanese combat power exponentially as training programs struggled to produce even basically competent replacements. Technical innovation continued. As 1945 progressed, the American Fire Direction Center continued to evolve while Japanese tactics stagnated. The improved M10 plotting boards and refined communication systems produced even more precise fires with faster response times. These systems could coordinate naval gunfire support in addition to their standard artillery, multiplying their effective firepower. Japanese officers watching American defensive preparations transition from simple gun positions to sophisticated fire control networks realized they were facing not just superior firepower, but a weapon system of unprecedented coordination. The cultural shock. Beyond the technological superiority, Japanese commanders struggled to comprehend the American approach to defensive combat. The Japanese had elevated infantry assault to an art form, emphasizing individual courage and warrior spirit. The Americans treated defense as an engineering problem to be solved with superior technology and systems. Colonel Masayuki Shimada, a staff officer who analyzed combat reports, wrote, "After each defeat, we could not accept that fighting spirit alone was insufficient. Every report of American artillery superiority was met with demands for greater dedication, more aggressive spirit. We confused courage with capability." This cultural blindness prevented effective adaptation. While American units continuously refined tactics based on combat experience, Japanese training continued to emphasize spiritual strength and individual combat prowess, skills useless against an enemy that refused to engage on those terms. The radar revolution. By mid-1945, some artillery units were equipped with primitive counter-battery radar for locating enemy gun positions. This technology was completely beyond Japanese capability to match or counter. Darkness had previously been a sanctuary for Japanese attack preparations. Now even the cover of night offered no protection. The Okinawa slaughter. While specialized FDCs weren't directly credited in official reports of the Battle of Okinawa in April 1945, their impact was felt in the quality of American defense that faced the largest Japanese attacks. Years of refinement in artillery coordination had eliminated gaps in defensive fires that earlier Japanese attacks had exploited. The casualties at Okinawa, where American artillery inflicted over 70,000 Japanese casualties, was the culmination of a process the FDC system had accelerated. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commanding the Pacific Fleet, later admitted, "Our artillery coordination was the decisive factor. Japanese attacks that might have succeeded in 1942 were systematically destroyed in 1945. Desperation and innovation. As 1944 turned to 1945, Japanese attempts to counter American artillery became increasingly desperate. They experimented with infiltration attacks, recognizing that massed formations were hopeless. They developed new night attack doctrines specifically to avoid artillery observation.
They even attempted to develop their own fire coordination system, though none reached operational status in meaningful numbers. The Type 99 Hodo, Japan's attempt at a coordinated artillery system, demonstrated the technological gap. While American fire direction centers had been operational since 1942, the Hodo system didn't enter limited service until 1945, and fewer than 20 units were ever deployed.
It was slower than the American system, lacked the mathematical precision, and suffered from chronic communications problems. The end of offensive capability. By early 1945, Japanese commanders no longer spoke of offensive operations or decisive victory. They spoke of survival. The American artillery system, along with other defensive innovations, had established complete dominance over Pacific battlefields. Major Nakamura himself would later state that the Fire Direction Center destroyed the spirit of the Japanese infantry officer. The courage of our men became meaningless in the face of such precision. The numbers tell the story. The statistics of American artillery operations in the Pacific tell a story of overwhelming superiority. Over 60,000 Japanese soldiers killed by coordinated artillery fire. The 11th Field Artillery Battalion achieved precise time-on-target missions with all shells landing within 3 seconds of each other. The average Infantry Division had 12 105mm howitzers and 12 155mm howitzers under central control. Against these achievements, Japanese casualty rates told a grimmer story. By war's end, Japan had lost over 80% of its experienced officers who had begun the war. The average Japanese company commander in 1945 had less than 6 months of combat experience. They were not warriors, but sacrificial pawns sent against an enemy they had no hope of defeating. Post-war revelations. After Japan's surrender, American occupation forces conducted extensive interviews with surviving Japanese officers and commanders. These interviews revealed the full extent of the psychological impact the Fire Direction Center had inflicted. Colonel Masayuki Shimada admitted, "The American artillery broke our confidence completely. We had believed in our superiority, in our spiritual strength, in our tactics. The FDC showed us we were wrong about everything. It wasn't just more powerful or more accurate. It represented a way of war we couldn't match." One Japanese infantry officer interviewed stated, "On my first encounter with coordinated American artillery, I was astonished to find defensive fires that could shift across our entire formation within seconds. We thought our spirit was superior to any defensive system in the world." The technical analysis. Post-war technical analysis revealed the full extent of the performance gap. Japanese infantry tactics, Banzai charge relying on shock effect and psychological impact, minimal coordination with supporting weapons, spiritual commitment as primary advantage, artillery support uncoordinated in general. American defensive system, Fire Direction Center coordinating multiple batteries, time-on-target capability bringing all shells on target simultaneously, forward observers linked directly to computational centers, precise firing data calculated mathematically. The numbers revealed a complete mismatch. Japanese tactics had been designed for a different war, one where individual combat skill and warrior spirit determined victory. The American FDC represented industrial-age warfare, where technology, systems integration, and data-driven operations determined outcomes. The industrial context. The Fire Direction Center's superiority reflected American industrial might that dwarfed Japanese capacity. America deployed over 380 artillery battalions with full FDC capability during the war. Japan struggled to equip even its home defense units with basic communications equipment.
American production methods utilizing precision instruments and standardized components produced artillery computational equipment faster than Japan could train officers to use it. Each fire direction center incorporated specialized firing tables, communications networks, and plotting boards manufactured to precise tolerances, a testament to American industrial coordination that Japan couldn't replicate. The SCR-300 radio sets powering the artillery communications network were masterpieces of engineering, incorporating frequency modulation technology, portable power supplies, and weather-resistant design beyond Japanese capabilities. While Japanese communications relied extensively on field telephones and runners, American systems were essentially wireless and mobile, simplifying battlefield coordination and improving reliability. The training disparity. By 1944, the gap in officer training had become unbridgeable. American artillery officers received specialized education at the Field Artillery School at Fort Sill, including advanced ballistic calculation and firing table usage, communications networks establishment and maintenance, multiple battery coordination techniques, fire planning for defensive operations, observed and unobserved fire procedures, and comprehensive weapon systems knowledge. Japanese training by 1944 consisted of basic tactical instruction, minimal technical training, limited practice firing, ammunition was scarce, no specialized coordination training, emphasis on spirit over technical competence, and preparation for special attack missions. The result was predictable. American units arrived in theater as professional systems managers. Japanese units arrived as enthusiastic but technically limited formations. Tactical evolution. The Fire Direction Center forced fundamental changes in infantry combat tactics. The traditional mass attack, which had dominated Japanese offensive doctrine since the Russo-Japanese War, became obsolete. While Japanese commanders could still motivate men to charge American positions with courage and determination, American coordination coupled with concentrated firepower meant these attacks faced precisely calculated defensive fires that tracked their movement. American artillerymen developed the continuous coverage technique, shifting fires just ahead of advancing Japanese formations, creating a moving wall of steel they could not penetrate. This tactic, impossible without the FDC's coordination capabilities, rendered Japanese attack formations useless. The Japanese attempted to adapt by using terrain features to mask their approach, but the American Forward Observer System, with its radio links to the FDC, could shift fires to cover even these protected approaches. They tried infiltration tactics, but dispersed units lacked the shock effect that had made the Banzai charge effective. The coordination gap was simply too large. The psychological warfare component. The distinctive sound of American time-on-target artillery became a psychological weapon. Unlike conventional barrages where shells arrived in a rolling pattern, time-on-target missions delivered dozens or hundreds of shells simultaneously, creating a devastating psychological impact that stunned Japanese formations before they could react.
This unique battlefield signature became a symbol of American technological superiority that struck fear into Japanese soldiers long before combat was joined. Intelligence reports indicated that the mere sound of American artillery fire coordination would cause Japanese units to delay attacks or seek cover rather than continue their advance. The system's effectiveness among Japanese soldiers, the invisible hand of death, reflected both awe at its precision and despair at their inability to counter it. Strategic impact. The FDC's superiority had strategic implications beyond tactical combat. Japanese military planning had assumed that superior fighting spirit would allow their infantry to overcome American firepower advantages. The Fire Direction Center demonstrated that technology could create such overwhelming defensive advantage that spirit became irrelevant. This realization influenced Japanese strategic decisions, including acceleration of kamikaze tactics as conventional attacks became hopeless, withdrawal of remaining experienced officers to home island defense, abandonment of offensive operations by mid-1944, diversion of resources to desperate underground fortification projects, recognition that the war was unwinnable by conventional means. Admiral Motome Ugaki, Chief of Staff to Admiral Yamamoto, privately acknowledged in October 1944, "We no longer have the capability to conduct effective offensive operations. The American defensive systems, especially their artillery coordination, have eliminated our ability to close with their forces." The maintenance and logistics victory.
The Fire Direction Center's apparent complexity initially concerned American planners, but it demonstrated another American advantage: sophisticated maintenance and logistics capabilities. FDC units maintained operational rates exceeding 90%, even in primitive Pacific conditions. Japanese units attempting to coordinate attacks with multiple elements struggled to maintain 40% coordination effectiveness by 1944. American maintenance teams, many recruited from civilian telecommunications industries, brought systematic approaches to communications maintenance. They developed specialized testing equipment, standardized procedures, and preventative maintenance schedules. Japanese communications remained largely primitive, relying on field telephones and visual signals rather than integrated radio networks. The navigation and targeting technology gap. FDCs equipped with the latest computational equipment could calculate precise firing data for any point on the battlefield within minutes. They could adjust fires based on observer reports, shift concentrations between multiple targets, and deliver precise support where needed most. Japanese artillery still relied primarily on pre-registered target points and visual adjustment, limiting their flexibility and response time. This targeting advantage became critical during defensive operations. Time-on-target missions required precise calculation of different shell flight times to ensure simultaneous impact, mathematics beyond Japanese capability with their available equipment. The impact on Japanese Army morale. The Imperial Japanese Army had built its entire strategic doctrine around offensive spirit and decisive battle. The FDC's dominance shattered this foundation. Infantry units rebuilt after New Guinea and Guadalcanal losses were decimated by American artillery during the Philippines and Iwo Jima campaigns.
By 1945, Japanese formations operated at half strength with poorly trained replacements. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, commanding the Iwo Jima garrison, reported before the American landing, "Our soldiers are not prepared for the precision of American artillery. They can barely construct adequate defenses, much less launch effective counterattacks. We are sending them against a system they cannot overcome." The cultural transformation. The encounter with the Fire Direction Center forced a fundamental transformation in Japanese military thinking. The Bushido Code, emphasizing spiritual strength and warrior prowess, proved inadequate against American technological warfare. Younger Japanese officers began questioning the entire basis of Japanese military doctrine. This cultural transformation extended beyond the military. Japanese soldiers returning from combat, those few who survived, brought stories of American technological superiority that contradicted years of propaganda about Western decadence and Japanese spiritual superiority. The economic reality. The Fire Direction Center program represented an economic investment Japan couldn't match. Each FDC required specialized equipment, trained personnel, and communications networks that exceeded Japanese industrial capacity. Japan struggled to produce even basic artillery pieces in meaningful numbers by 1944. The electronics required for a single artillery communications network exceeded what many Japanese factories received in a month by 1944. The precision instruments, the radio equipment, the computational tools, each component represented industrial capabilities Japan had never developed. The officer testimony. The most powerful evidence of the FDC's impact comes from Japanese officer testimonies. These men, trained to never admit weakness, universally acknowledged the American system's superiority in post-war interviews. Lieutenant Colonel Takeo Yamauchi, "The Americans could place their artillery exactly where they wanted it, when they wanted it. Our men would be in the middle of an attack, then suddenly every American gun would fire at once directly on their position. There was no defense against such precision." The ultimate humiliation. Perhaps the greatest humiliation came not from combat losses, but from the FDC's other capabilities. Artillery survey teams mapped every inch of contested territory with precision. Japanese positions, movements, and preparations were continuously covered by potential fire missions. Japanese commanders realized their every movement could be targeted,
measured and destroyed with mathematical precision. American survey officers, equipped with the latest optical and computational equipment, could register targets across entire islands with impunity. Japanese counterparts sent to disrupt them simply couldn't match their technical proficiency. The legacy of shock. The shock Japanese officers experienced when encountering the Fire Direction Center extended far beyond the war. It influenced post-war Japanese military development, doctrine, and even cultural attitudes toward technology versus tradition. Many surviving Japanese officers became advocates for technological advancement in post-war Japan. They had learned firsthand that courage without capability was meaningless. Their experiences influenced Japan's post-war embrace of technology and industrial development.
Colonel Toshikazu Case, who became an influential defense policy advisor after the war, often spoke about the lessons learned from facing American artillery. The Fire Direction Center taught us that we must never again fall behind technologically. It showed us that systems integration, not warrior spirit, determines victory in modern war. The Technical Innovation Race. The FDC's evolution during the war demonstrated American advantages in rapid technical improvement. Problems identified in combat were quickly addressed in new operational procedures. Communication delays led to improved radio networks. Calculation errors led to simplified firing tables. Coordination challenges led to standardized procedures. Japanese tactical development, constrained by limited resources and institutional rigidity, couldn't match this pace of improvement. The infantry tactics that fought in 1945 were essentially the same approaches that had attacked Pearl Harbor, with minor variations. The American FDC of 1945 was dramatically superior to the prototype systems of 1942. The final assessment. General Walter Kruger, commander of 6th Army, was quoted as saying, "Our artillery coordination was the decisive factor in defeating Japanese attacks. The Fire Direction Center gave us the ability to concentrate overwhelming firepower exactly where and when it was needed, with results that no amount of enemy courage could overcome." This ability to coordinate defensive fires represented a revolution in battlefield management that Japanese doctrine never successfully countered. The statistics are overwhelming. By war's end, the ratio of casualties in engagements involving coordinated artillery defense often exceeded 15-1 in favor of American forces. The mathematics of attrition were unsustainable for Japan. The broader implications. The FDC's dominance over Japanese attacks represented more than just technological superiority. It demonstrated fundamental differences in approach to warfare, industrial capacity, innovation, culture, and strategic thinking. The Japanese had prepared for a short, decisive war where warrior spirit would overcome material disadvantages. The Fire Direction Center represented American preparation for a long industrial war where technology and production would prove decisive. The psychological shock experienced by Japanese officers encountering American artillery coordination was really the shock of encountering modernity itself. The FDC represented systematic application of science, mathematics, and industrial management to warfare. Against this, the samurai tradition, however noble, was helpless. The human cost. Behind the statistics and technical specifications lay human tragedy. Thousands of young Japanese soldiers, many with minimal training, were sent against American defensive positions with coordinated artillery support. They knew they had little chance. Their letters home, discovered after the war, reveal young men resigned to death. One young officer wrote before his final attack, "Mother, I will face the American artillery tomorrow. I do not expect to return. Their coordination is beyond anything we can overcome. I will do my duty, but I know it is hopeless." He died in an artillery barrage near Lingayen Gulf in January 1945. His was one of thousands of similar stories. Young lives sacrificed to a technological gap that courage couldn't bridge. The lasting influence. The FDC's impact extended beyond World War II. It influenced Cold War military development, with both the United States and Soviet Union developing increasingly sophisticated artillery coordination systems based on lessons learned from the Pacific.
The concept of using technology to create overwhelming advantage became central to American military doctrine. For Japan, the experience influenced their post-war self-defense forces to prioritize quality over quantity, advanced technology over mass mobilization. The trauma of technological inferiority left lasting marks on Japanese military thinking. Conclusion: the end of an era. The shock Japanese commanders experienced when they could not overcome American artillery coordination marked the end of an era in land warfare. The age of the individual warrior soldier, where personal courage and fighting spirit determined victory, died in the jungles of the Pacific. It was replaced by industrial age warfare, where technology, systems integration, and data-driven operations determined outcomes. Colonel Toshikatsu Kase's post-war reflection that the Fire Direction Center destroyed the morale of the Japanese infantry captured the essence of this transformation. It wasn't just that American artillery was more powerful or more accurate. It represented a way of war that Japan couldn't match. The Japanese officers who survived learned a harsh lesson. In modern war, courage without technology is not heroism, but futility. The Fire Direction Center didn't just defeat Japanese attacks, it shattered an entire worldview about warfare, honor, and national power. Their shock was the shock of discovering that everything they believed about infantry combat was wrong. The Banzai charge, which had seemed unstoppable in 1941, was obsolete by 1943. The officers who had trained for years in spiritual combat found their skills useless against an enemy that refused to engage on those terms. In the end, the invisible hand of death that haunted Japanese soldiers' nightmares represented more than just a superior defensive system. It embodied American industrial might, technological innovation, and systematic approach to warfare that would define the second half of the 20th century. The last word belongs to Colonel Kase, who survived the war and lived to reflect on its lessons. The Fire Direction Center taught us the hardest lesson of all, that the age of the samurai was over. In the jungles of the Pacific, we met the future, and it destroyed us. The shock of that encounter reverberates still, a reminder that in modern warfare, technology and systems integration ultimately triumph over tradition and individual valor. The Japanese officers who could not overcome American artillery coordination learned this lesson at the cost of their men's lives, their tactics, and ultimately their empire's dreams of dominance. They had challenged the arsenal of democracy with the spirit of the samurai. The Fire Direction Center was democracy's answer, delivered with mathematical precision that no amount of courage could overcome. The transformation of American artillery. The Fire Direction Center represented the culmination of decades of American military innovation. Before World War I, artillery had been a direct-fire weapon, with gunners often seeing their targets. The experience of trench warfare had demonstrated the need for indirect fire capability, but coordination remained primitive. Between the wars, a small group of forward-thinking officers at the Field Artillery School at Fort Sill had quietly revolutionized the concept of artillery support.
Officers like Carlos Brewer and E.L. Seibert developed the Fire Direction Center concept through persistent experimentation and mathematical refinement. Their innovations weren't just technical, but doctrinal. They reimagined artillery not as individual batteries supporting specific units, but as a division-level asset that could be concentrated at the decisive point. This intellectual revolution was as important as the technical one. By 1941, the system had been standardized across the U.S. Army, though its true potential remained untested in combat. The Pacific War would provide that test, and Japanese infantry would bear the cost of America's artillery revolution. The science of destruction.
At the heart of the Fire Direction Center's effectiveness was a scientific approach to artillery that Japanese officers initially dismissed. The American system treated artillery as a mathematical problem with multiple variables: gun position coordinates, target coordinates, meteorological conditions, projectile ballistic properties. These variables were processed through firing tables, plotting boards, and calculation tools to produce precise firing data. The Japanese approach, with its emphasis on spirit and direct officer control, had no equivalent system. The American artillery officer had become a technician as much as a warrior. He calculated, coordinated, and controlled rather than inspired or led by example. This transformation in the nature of command represented a paradigm shift in warfare that Japanese doctrine couldn't accommodate. The FDC's structure and operation. To understand the revolution in artillery that so shocked Japanese officers, one must understand the basic structure of the American Fire Direction Center. At its core were three elements: the Fire Direction Officer, FDO, who made tactical decisions about target priority and ammunition selection; the Horizontal Control Operator, HCO, who plotted target and battery locations on a firing chart; and the Vertical Control Operator, VCO, who determined elevation data based on target distance and terrain. These three specialists, working with slide rules, firing tables, and plotting boards, could process multiple fire missions simultaneously, prioritize targets based on threat, and adjust fires based on observer reports. Surrounding this computational core was a communications network linking forward observers, battery positions, and infantry commanders. The entire system operated as an integrated whole, processing information, making decisions, and delivering fires with unprecedented speed and accuracy. Japanese officers, accustomed to artillery that functioned as individual guns, or at best, loosely coordinated batteries, had no framework for understanding this level of integration. Their shock was the shock of confronting not just a new weapon, but an entirely new concept of warfare.
The entire process, from initial sighting to effective fire, could be completed in less than 3 minutes. Japanese officers accustomed to artillery that took 10–15 minutes to adjust onto a target found this response time incomprehensible. The shock effect of time-on-target missions, where dozens or hundreds of shells would impact simultaneously, created both physical and psychological devastation that conventional rolling barrages could not match. Japanese soldiers described the experience as the sky falling at once. The communication revolution. Perhaps the most underappreciated aspect of the Fire Direction Center was its communications network. The American system utilized multiple radio channels, field telephones, and message runners in an integrated communication plan. Forward observers could communicate directly with the FDC rather than individual batteries. The FDC could communicate simultaneously with multiple batteries. Infantry commanders could request fire support through a standardized request format. This communications integration created a responsive system that could adapt to changing battlefield conditions within minutes. Japanese communication systems, with their emphasis on hierarchical command and limited technical capability, could not match this flexibility. The human factor. Despite its technical sophistication, the Fire Direction Center's effectiveness ultimately depended on the quality of its personnel. American artillery units received specialized training that transformed ordinary citizens into technical specialists. The typical FDC team included college-educated officers who understood ballistics and mathematics, radio operators skilled in maintaining complex electronic equipment, computation specialists who could process firing data rapidly and accurately, enlisted personnel who understood both the technical and tactical aspects of artillery employment,
This combination of technical expertise and practical battlefield knowledge created teams that could function effectively under the stress of combat. Japanese officers, trained in a military tradition that emphasized character development over technical specialization, could not match this level of professional expertise. The doctrinal innovation. The Fire Direction Center represented not just a technical innovation, but a doctrinal revolution. Traditional artillery doctrine had emphasized direct support relationships between specific artillery units and the infantry they supported. The FDC concept broke this linkage, creating instead a pooled artillery resource that could be concentrated at the decisive point. This doctrinal shift allowed American commanders to achieve local fire superiority that Japanese attacks could not overcome. The concept of artillery as a division-level asset rather than a regimental support weapon fundamentally changed the mathematics of combat power. Japanese doctrine, which still treated artillery as a supporting arm with limited independent tactical significance, had no answer to this concentration of fires. The evolutionary advantage. The American artillery system demonstrated another critical advantage. It could evolve based on combat experience. The basic fire direction center concept remained constant, but its implementation continuously improved throughout the war. Early experiences in Guadalcanal led to improved communications procedures. Lessons from New Guinea resulted in better coordination with air support. The Philippines campaign demonstrated the need for improved counter-battery capabilities.
Each lesson was systematically analyzed, solutions developed, and improvements distributed throughout the force. This organizational learning capability represented another dimension of superiority that Japanese forces could not match. The Japanese military, with its emphasis on tradition and established procedure, lacked the institutional flexibility to adapt at a comparable rate. By 1945, American artillery procedures had undergone multiple evolutionary cycles, while Japanese doctrine remained essentially unchanged. The final confrontation. As American forces approached the Japanese home islands in 1945, the full impact of artillery superiority became apparent. Japanese defense planning for Operation Ketsugo, the defense of the homeland, explicitly acknowledged the impossibility of countering American artillery. Instead, Japanese planners adopted a strategy of dispersion and concealment, abandoning traditional defense doctrine in favor of a guerrilla-style approach that would minimize vulnerability to coordinated fires. This final admission of technological defeat represented the complete collapse of Japanese military doctrine. The atomic bombs that ended the war before the invasion of Japan have overshadowed this fundamental transformation in Japanese strategy, yet it remains perhaps the clearest evidence of how thoroughly the Fire Direction Center had shattered Japanese confidence in their traditional combat methods. Legacy and modern warfare. The impact of the American artillery revolution continues to echo in modern military doctrine. Today's combat systems, with their networked sensors, digital fire control, and precision munitions, are direct descendants of the Fire Direction Center concept developed in the 1940s. The U.S. Army's current Advanced Field Artillery Tactical Data System, AFAT-DS, represents the culmination of decades of evolution from those original concepts. Modern artillery units can coordinate fires across multiple platforms, integrate intelligence from multiple sensors, and deliver precise effects that would have seemed miraculous to the officers who developed the first FDCs. The psychological dimension of combat that so shocked Japanese commanders remains equally relevant. Modern armies train specifically to withstand the psychological impact of coordinated fires, recognizing that technical superiority can create effects that transcend physical destruction. The resurrection of the Japanese military. In the decades following World War II, Japan's self-defense forces had to rebuild from the ashes of defeat. The lessons learned from encountering American artillery coordination profoundly influenced this reconstruction. The post-war Japanese military embraced technology with an enthusiasm that would have shocked their wartime predecessors.
They developed sophisticated fire control systems, integrated communications networks, and precision targeting capabilities that rivaled or exceeded those of their former enemies. The transformation was not just technical, but cultural. The emphasis on spiritual factors that had dominated Imperial Japanese doctrine was replaced by a focus on professional competence, technical mastery, and systems integration. The influence extended beyond artillery to permeate Japan's entire approach to defense. The electronics industry that would later make Japan a world leader had its origins partly in the determination to never again fall behind technologically as they had in the 1940s. The human dimension.
For the young American soldiers who operated the fire direction centers, the war presented a profound paradox. Many were not natural warriors but mathematicians, engineers, and technicians drafted into military service. These men, often with backgrounds in science and mathematics, found themselves wielding devastating power through the application of formulas and calculations. Their experience represented a different kind of warfare, one where technical expertise, rather than physical courage, determined battlefield effectiveness. Their Japanese counterparts, trained in a tradition that emphasized character development and spiritual strength, could not comprehend this technocratic approach to combat. The cultural gap was as significant as the technological one. The ethics of technological warfare. The American artillery system raised profound ethical questions that continue to resonate in discussions of modern warfare. By creating such overwhelming advantage, it challenged traditional notions of military honor and the warrior code. Japanese officers, steeped in Bushido traditions that emphasized personal courage and direct confrontation, viewed the American approach as somehow dishonorable, fighting from a distance with mathematical precision rather than face-to-face with spiritual commitment. American officers, products of an industrial democracy, saw their approach as simply the most efficient application of available resources to achieve military objectives with minimal friendly casualties. The clash represented not just different military doctrines, but different ethical frameworks for understanding warfare itself. This ethical dimension continues to influence debates about modern precision weapons, drone warfare, and cyber operations, all descendants of the system-based approach to warfare that the Fire Direction Center represented. The mathematics of superiority. The statistical advantage created by the American artillery system was overwhelming. A well-coordinated defensive fire mission could achieve casualty ratios exceeding 30-1 against attacking Japanese formations. Even the most fanatically motivated attack could not sustain such losses and maintain combat effectiveness. The mathematics of attrition became the determining factor in combat outcomes, regardless of spiritual factors or individual courage. This reality forced Japanese commanders to confront the limitations of their doctrine. No amount of spiritual preparation or willingness to sacrifice could overcome such disparity in combat power. The lesson that systems integration and technological advantage could create overwhelming superiority would influence military thinking for generations. The perspective of the Japanese soldier. The experiences of ordinary Japanese soldiers facing American artillery coordination revealed the human dimension of technological shock. Diary entries recovered from battlefield positions tell a story of growing despair as men realized they faced an enemy that could strike with devastating precision from beyond their reach. One diary recovered from Leyte contained this entry: "The American artillery is like nothing we have faced before. It strikes without warning, all at once, exactly where we are gathering. There is no place to hide, no way to fight back. We prepare to attack, and before we move, the shells fall like rain. How do they know? How can they be so precise?" This sense of fighting an omniscient enemy created psychological effects that transcended physical casualties.
Japanese units reported declining morale and increasing desertion rates as soldiers concluded they faced not just a superior enemy, but an unbeatable one. The perspective of American gunners.
For the American artillerymen operating the fire direction centers, the war presented a different experience. Many never saw their enemies directly, engaging them instead through mathematical formulas, map coordinates, and radio communications. Technical Sergeant Robert Johnson of the 11th Field Artillery Battalion recalled, "We dealt in numbers, deflection, elevation, meteorological corrections. Sometimes it was hard to remember these calculations represented actual people on the receiving end. We measured success in mathematical terms, circular error probable, time on target, rounds per effect. Only when we saw the results afterward did the human reality become clear." This dissociation between the technical act of coordinating fires and its lethal consequences represented another dimension of modern warfare. The system created emotional distance between the triggermen and their targets, a feature that would become increasingly prominent in later technological developments. Voices from the battlefield. The most compelling testimonies come from those who experienced the artillery revolution firsthand. American infantry defenders who witnessed the effect of coordinated fires on attacking Japanese formations described scenes of almost unimaginable destruction. Private First Class Thomas Miller, 41st Infantry Division, wrote, "They came at us in waves, hundreds of them screaming Banzai. Our line was thin, and for a moment I thought they would overwhelm us. Then the artillery opened up. Not the usual scattered shells, but hundreds, all at once, right in the middle of their formation. One minute they were charging, the next there was just smoke and screams. Those who survived turned and ran. I've never seen anything like it before or since." For Japanese survivors, the memory remained equally vivid. Sergeant Hiroshi Tanaka recalled, "We were told American artillery was inaccurate, that their shells would land far from our attack formations. We believed we could reach their lines before effective fire could stop us. We were wrong. The shells came all at once, as if the sky itself was falling. My entire platoon disappeared in seconds. I survived only because I fell into a shell crater from an earlier barrage." These personal accounts humanize the statistical reality of technological superiority, revealing its impact on individual soldiers caught in its path. The intelligence failure. One of the most significant aspects of the Japanese shock was the complete failure of their intelligence assessment regarding American artillery capabilities. Imperial Japanese Army intelligence had consistently underestimated the effectiveness of the Fire Direction Center, dismissing reports of its coordination capabilities as exaggeration. Colonel Masanobu Tsuji, one of Japan's most influential intelligence officers, had assured commanders that American artillery, while powerful, lacked the coordination to stop determined infantry assaults. This assessment, based on outdated information and cultural bias, led to disastrous tactical decisions. The intelligence failure reflected deeper problems in Japanese military culture: an unwillingness to acknowledge enemy superiority, and a tendency to dismiss technological innovation in favor of spiritual factors.
These cultural blind spots proved fatal when confronting an enemy whose approach to warfare emphasized systems integration and technological advantage. The unlearned lesson. Perhaps the most tragic aspect of the Japanese experience was their inability to adapt to the reality they faced. Even as evidence of American artillery superiority mounted, Imperial Army doctrine continued to emphasize spiritual factors and traditional infantry tactics. Training programs for replacement officers still focused on developing fighting spirit rather than technical competence. Tactical manuals still prescribed frontal assaults against prepared positions. Resource allocation still prioritized traditional weapons over communications and coordination systems. This failure to adapt reflected institutional rigidity and cultural resistance to change that transcended individual combat performance. The Japanese military system, structured around hierarchical authority and traditional values, could not process and respond to the evidence of its own battlefield failures. The cost in lives. The human cost of this doctrinal failure was measured in thousands of lives sacrificed to outdated concepts of warfare. By 1945, Japanese infantry attacks against American positions had become little more than ritualized suicide. Young soldiers with minimal training were sent against defenses coordinated with mathematical precision. Colonel Hiromichi Yahara, a staff officer who survived the Battle of Okinawa, later wrote, "We sent our youth to die against a system they could not defeat. Their courage was magnificent, their sacrifice total, their deaths utterly meaningless." No tactical objective justified such losses. No strategic goal could be achieved through such sacrifice. This tragic waste of human potential represented the ultimate failure of Japanese military thinking, its inability to value the lives of its own soldiers enough to adapt its doctrine to battlefield realities. The technological acceleration. The success of the Fire Direction Center accelerated American investment in technological approaches to warfare. Resources poured into developing increasingly sophisticated coordination systems, communication networks, and computational tools. The results transformed not just artillery, but every aspect of military operations. By war's end, American forces operated with a level of coordination and information sharing that Japanese commanders could scarcely comprehend, much less match. This acceleration created a virtuous cycle of innovation and effectiveness that widened the capability gap with each passing month. Japanese officers watching American capabilities evolve realized they faced not just current disadvantage, but an enemy whose superiority increased daily. The legacy of leadership. The Fire Direction Center revolution highlighted the changing nature of military leadership in the industrial age. Traditional concepts of leadership emphasized personal courage, charismatic inspiration, and leading from the front. The new system required different leadership qualities: technical competence, systems thinking, and the ability to coordinate complex operations. Officers became managers of technology rather than inspirational warriors. This transformation challenged traditional military cultures worldwide. Armies that successfully adapted embraced a new definition of military professionalism that integrated technical expertise with traditional leadership qualities. Those that resisted found themselves increasingly outmatched on modern battlefields.
The Fire Direction Center represented one of history's most significant shifts in the nature of military command, from art to science, from inspiration to coordination. The shock Japanese officers experienced when confronting this reality was the shock of discovering their profession had fundamentally changed beneath them. The philosophical dimension. Beyond tactics and technology, the artillery revolution revealed a philosophical divide between Eastern and Western approaches to warfare. Japanese military philosophy emphasized the primacy of spiritual factors: courage, determination, and willingness to sacrifice. American doctrine, influenced by industrial management principles, emphasized systems integration, efficiency, and technological advantage. These differing philosophical foundations led to fundamentally different approaches to solving battlefield problems. The clash represented not just competing tactical systems, but different worldviews about the nature of warfare itself. The Japanese approach, rooted in centuries of warrior tradition, confronted an American system born of industrial efficiency and scientific management. The outcome revealed the limitations of traditional warrior philosophy in the face of industrialized warfare. Spirit alone, however powerful, could not overcome systemic technological advantage. This lesson, learned at tremendous cost in the Pacific, would reshape military thinking worldwide. The global impact. The success of American artillery coordination influenced military development far beyond the United States and Japan. Armies worldwide studied the lessons of the Pacific War and reformed their doctrines accordingly. The Soviet Union, despite its different political system, adopted similar approaches to artillery coordination. European NATO forces integrated fire direction center concepts into their defensive plans. Even developing nations prioritized artillery coordination systems over more traditional military investments. This global adoption represented acknowledgement that the nature of warfare had fundamentally changed. The age of the individual warrior had given way to the era of systems warfare, where coordination and integration determined battlefield superiority. Personal courage and fighting spirit remained important, but they now operated within a framework of technological systems that amplified or constrained their effectiveness. This new reality, first demonstrated conclusively in the Pacific, would define military competition throughout the Cold War and beyond. The civilian transfer. Perhaps the most significant legacy of the Fire Direction Center was not military, but civilian. The systems integration approach pioneered by American artillery officers would later influence developments in computer science, telecommunications, and industrial management. Many of the officers and enlisted personnel who operated FDCs during the war went on to careers in emerging technological fields. They carried with them the lessons of coordinated systems and applied them to civilian challenges. The result was an acceleration of technological integration across American society. The concepts pioneered in artillery coordination found applications in air traffic control, industrial automation, and eventually computer networking. This civilian transfer represents one of history's most significant examples of military innovation driving broader social and economic development.
Prevailed not because it was more heroic, but because it was more effective. This understanding that systems rather than individuals determine battlefield outcomes continues to guide military development worldwide. The shock Japanese officers experienced when their Banzai attacks were obliterated by coordinated American artillery fire marked a decisive turning point in military history, the moment when the age of the warrior definitively gave way to the age of systems warfare. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.